Zatia, Ijiji Judy Witike. My name is Judy Panka Abazi, Mashte Panka, Oklahoma. I'm a member of the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma. I'm an elder, matriarch of a large clan, and the environmental ambassador. Most importantly, I'm a great-grandmother, a grandmother, a sister, an auntie, a descendant of the Holocaust, and the way that we're moving forward is through teaching my women folks and upholding the men in our family. It's wonderful to be here with you. It feels very important for us to share these times because of this COVID nonsense that's happening, but also because our Mother, the Earth, is calling for us to be her voice, calling for us to be, I think in the Lakota way, it's the same, Ieska, translator, for the winds, for the waters, for the trees, for the wings, and for those forms of life that humans have been ignoring their voices. Now these human voices in the indigenous world are beginning to share what it is that we're hearing and how we're hearing it and what the message is. And I'm very honored to be here among you and to say a few words on behalf of all my relations in all directions. I ask you to join me in whatever way your spirit moves you. If it asks you to be quiet for a moment and to listen, that's good. If it asks you to speak along, offer a song, or to get up and get a cup of coffee, whatever way that is for you, I'm honored to share this moment with you. Mianda, Nachde, Ni, Dachte, Cheda, Debia, Shange, Shinuda, Shinga, Ishagi, Waujinga. Great Spirit, Earth Mother, I want to say thank you for this day, for the Father, Son, for the Moon Mother and all the rhythms that she guides, for the sacred water, sacred fire, sacred earth, for the deer, the four legs, those that frogs, those fins, the sacred water and fire that contains all life, those trees, the sacred corn, the relatives that live all around us that give us life. We want to say thank you to them on this day. We ask for guidance during creation. We ask you to guide our words, our thoughts, our movements, and our messages. We ask you to look at those that are ill of health and those making transition, either leaving this world or coming into it. Help us to set a path forward for all that is, to think beyond what it means to be human and have life, but what it means to be human. Guide us through this time, Thunder Nation. Guide us through this time, Star Nation. Give us a way forward as we look back at the ancestors who made a way for us. for anything we've forgotten. We ask you to fill our minds and our hearts and our spirits with that wellness. Thank you. Sha. Weeblaha.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful, Casey. Before we get started, I do want to make just a really quick introduction again of the folks that we have on the panel. Let you introduce yourself very briefly. I know we just introduced Casey, so Casey, I'm going to let you go last. The first person that I want to introduce is Monica, because I do want to say Monica has a little bit of a shaky connection, so we want to get her introduced first. She may just be a voice to us later, but for right now, Monica, I want to pass it over to you. Go ahead and take it over. You might want to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I keep forgetting those things. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to say thank you, Wopiwatanka Chichapi, for allowing me to sit on this panel, having the patience with my shaky connection, and just wanted to say thank you to Casey for those wonderful words, and to let you know, Casey, that we started at the headwaters of the Missouri River yesterday, and are in a small town here in Montana, and we're kayaking the Missouri River heading, I guess you would say we're heading north right now, but we embarked on this a couple years ago, and we done a lot of the South Dakota, Missouri River, and now we're coming up into Montana, and it's a real spiritual journey, and it's a chance for us to reconnect with the water, which Nini Wachoni, water is life, which means so much to us, and we were pleasantly surprised that at the headwaters there was a lot of medicines, and we were able to acquire some of those medicines. So it's a really neat journey. So I just wanted to let Casey know that. Thank you.
And Maka, you want to take a minute and introduce your name and tell us who you are a little bit?
Ganesh. كقياتي خطر ساكي لخطتي قني قني خطس قطخيا قينا قيهكيتي خطلت خريدة قن. My name is Maka Mansur Paki, and my Tlingit name is Kitqayakte. I'm Tlingit and Mohawk, and I'm from Yakutat, Alaska. I'm calling in from the traditional homelands of the Dena'ina Athabascan people up here in Anchorage, Alaska, and am honored to join a panel with my relations and thankful to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about where you're at?
Just in the other room from you. No, hey everyone, I'm Brian Parras, and I live in Houston, Texas, and I am identify as Chicano, and I have ancestry that I am in the process of remembering and honoring and respecting, and I'm just grateful, to be in these circles with you all. And I'm in a place where, we are really seeing the impacts of climate change. So there's been a number of storms lately, and just have been doing a lot of prep and recovery for folks that have been hit. But looking forward to the conversation tonight. Very, very happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. And I know, Casey, you introduced us with a beautiful, brought us here with this beautiful prayer, but tell us a little bit about where you're located. Well, there was a lot of that in the film.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm in north central Oklahoma. We were forcibly removed here. My people and my own grandfather was 8 years old. We're originally from along Nishu, or the Missouri River, in Nebraska, or what they call Nebraska. And I live here among my people. I'm a former council person. I am, honored to have a huge clan that I'm proud of here. Monica, I need a favor. You're there, and the Missouri River has been really speaking in spirit. And there's things I want to share sometime down the road here, but I am going to ask you to lay some tobacco down for me. And just say, I'm looking for direction. I need that river to tell me what it wants. And I know she will let us know. So I thank you for, I should not come to you and ask you in this way, but I think it's correct. Yeah.
Thank you, Casey. It's an honor, and I will do that, and I have my curry tobacco with me.
Great, and I'm happy to be able to bring you two together to do that. Actually, it wasn't me, but I happen to be the moderator. So we'll start talking. I put some information in the chat about captions. If you'd like to see the captions in English to the panel, you can do that. The instructions are there. And we'll start off with Monica and Maka. Now, the documentary, while it was so moving and emotional, I know especially for me, as I mentioned earlier, that being part of that documentary, but in a few words, and we can start with Monica, can you share what your thoughts and your feelings were while you were watching this documentary?
My feelings were, I was extremely moved. I shed a tear when I seen the pollution and the effects that it had on our people and all of life, the plants and the poisoning and the lack of not knowing how awful the oil was and the petroleum was and the effects, and that when the young gal talked about living unhealthy became normal, that really hit home with me because we have a lot of the same issues. And so I was really moved, and I still am. It really touches me here and throughout my whole body. It was very moving, and my thoughts is that the message that it provides needs to be out there. They need to hear the Indigenous voice that was portrayed in this movie, and I think that's my thoughts. I would really love to be able to try to promote this and get the word out there more that this film provides.
And Maka, the same question. What were some of the things that you were thinking as you were watching this?
I would say at first that I felt grief and then hope. Films like this are so important because it's clear that in today's world, Indigenous people and people of color are left out of the world narrative. We're not in the limelight like Greta Thunberg or other activists that appeal to a certain type of audience. However, these stories are important, and understanding the genealogy of what that systemic racism means and what a triumph of our narratives being shared in a film like this. As Monica shared that she could relate, I could relate as well. In my village in Yakutat, Alaska, we had a culture camp that if you drive out of town and you go to across this bridge, it's a place that we kind of call the Enkau area. When I was a little girl, it was a place where our children would go learn traditional Tlingit way of life through song and dance and storytelling. And the culture camp began in 1985, but it closed in 2003 due to high levels of dioxin in the soil, the water, and the seafood. And these dioxin contaminants were left from abandoned military dump sites in the 1940s to 1970s. So instead of cleaning up, they buried everything and they shoved it in and they covered it up. And we ate shellfish from there when we were children. And my grandfather continued to harvest from there as I grew up. And so I could relate. And I think that's where the grief came from. But to see the unity of our people, to see Indigenous people, it's like all our hearts are at the ends of all these roots and they go to this core tree, which is the earth. And I think that's where I felt the hope. And whenever I think of the grief I feel or the fear I fear for what is happening to our climate, the hope is I feel like I just need to tug on one of those heartstrings to the tree. And there's another Indigenous relation that will help pull me up as we move forward together.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on the film. I know it's hard to put it all in, you know, some quick soundbite, but thank you. That was very, very beautiful for both, hearing both. That it gives you a little hope. So going back to what we've all been talking about here so far, Native folks often do refer to themselves as land and water protectors. And across so many Native nations and tribes and communities, there's such a strong cultural tie to the land. We'll take them one at a time. We'll start with whoever wants to start first. Can you each speak a bit about the importance of land to Indigenous people and why Indigenous people can be some of the best stewards of nature? Actually, I'll go ahead and start with Casey. Casey, will let you start first.
Thank you. I think maybe one begins by understanding the language that we have as opposed to the language of the colonizer. One thing that I keep hearing when I hear protector is they talk about protecting resources. And for me, you have to take the RE off of that. We are protecting sources of life. And we have to understand that we are not separate from those sources of life. That if we eat, if we drink, if we breathe, then we are part of the air, part of the winds that blow. We are part of the rooted nation or the forelegs or the wings as we put that inside us and it builds our cells. And as we build the babies in our wombs, we are part of the fire itself because our bodies are warm from the warmth of the core of our Mother Earth and from our Father's Sun. We have within the human body the same thing as travels in the Thunder Nation. The Thunder Nation is made up of wind. It's made up of fire. It's made up of water. And it is an entity of its own. So is the human body. It just has also got the things in it that make it more solid. The forelegs and the plants that we ingest. But we are, we're not protecting nature. We are nature protecting itself. And we come into that full realization with the ways that we were taught about how to relate to all that is. Not as humans are over here, nature's out there, and we should go and pay a few dollars to go tourism through it. No. We go step outside our door and the sun is rising and we have a relationship with that. The stars are twinkling and we have a relationship there. The grass, it feels us. The water, we say thank you to and ask for the health of the water. There's a true intricate relationship that we share, thing in place for the natural laws to be upheld. So the relationship is real, it's not abstract. Maybe that I should have just started there and said, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Brian, you want to take a crack at telling us your thoughts on the importance of land to Indigenous folks and why Indigenous folks are some of the best stewards of the land?
Yeah, it's really hard. And if you saw the film, you'll remember that one of the things I mentioned is that growing up in a big city that is so industrial, it's really hard to even understand, what land is, because all I see are the trains and the refineries and the chemical plants. And like just listening to Monica talk and hearing the train, it's like, oh, it's everywhere we are. And some folks get really nostalgic of those sounds, right? And that becomes their land. That becomes their relationship to the land, the industrial sounds and landscapes that surround them. It's just natural to be accustomed and grow fond of the space that is around you. But even having said that, like I have never felt the same way about like the city of Houston, where I live, like I did when I went to visit my grandparents in West Texas in a little town called Big Spring, and going hunting for rabbits, with my grandpa and our slingshots, and that gave me a little opportunity to really, think about the landscapes that I grew up in and what has been taken, from so many of us and what has been stripped from us. And looking at the history of the people I descend from Mexico, from the Southwest, and from right here in Texas. It's just a reminder of the violence and the long-term generational, impacts that come with that on people who have been forcibly removed, displaced, and had land taken from them. It hurts, and it really hurts, and yeah. So like hearing folks who want to fight projects, oftentimes like prioritizing landowners, it's just, again, another reminder, because I have a problem with that concept of just owning land. It just seems very foreign. And I grew up here, like in a major city, went to private schools my whole life. So it remains, a very difficult thing to understand within myself, just relationship to land. And I have to fight back all of the things that I was taught constantly. Yeah.
Maka?
Brian, it's perfect you say that, because it's the perfect segue to what I wanted to share. I feel that Indigenous people, many of us see ourselves as belonging to the land and not the other way around. And so how could we as humans own something so ancient and something that we depend on to live? I was looking at this photo earlier. It's a beautiful photo. It's my mother, my maternal grandmother, and my maternal great-grandmother here. And it's my mother in her youth, and my grandmother in the center, and my great-grandmother. And I would think, how would I ever go to my mother and tell her, I own you? It doesn't make sense to me. And so I suppose that's sort of how I look at it in terms of land ownership. And I feel funny with the word activist, because again, it's a colonial word. It's a colonial understanding, when really I believe that the people we saw in the film are a physical form of the land defending itself, and the physical proof of the love and the resilience of their ancestors. And so because that genealogy, because of that force and that passion is forced in love, I think that's why Indigenous people can be some of the best stewards or the best representations, because it's sort of like when politicians make decisions about our homes with us involved. It's not unlike when men try to make decisions about the rights of women's bodies without us involved. We should be the ones making the decisions in the first place. We're inheriting the impact. And I think because we're the physical proof of the love, and our thoughts are shaped by that, that might be why we come from a place of altruism. We're not speaking for ourselves. It's it's a echo of our ancestors, and I suppose a premonition of those to come.
Wow, I really like that visual of owning your mom. That's I haven't heard that before. It's really great. Thank you for that. And then, of course, do we have, there she is. Okay, sorry, that was my fault. Monica. So, I didn't see your picture. I thought maybe we had lost you. Sorry about that. And so, Monica, just to tell us a little bit about why you think Indigenous folks are the best stewards of the land, and that connection, how important that connection is.
Sure. Well, I agree with what everybody has said. It is our Unchi Maka, Grandmother Earth. Everything comes from Grandmother Earth. And as I said, when we got to the headwaters, there was so many medicines that were there. And one of the things that we talked about, we were fearful in gathering those. And then we said, why? We're on Indigenous land. These are our medicines. This is our mother supplying this medicine to us, and we should have every right to exercise our Indigenous rights and be able to harvest those medicines. So we did. We harvested what we did and we took. But I work on land issues a lot, and it's hard to say that because what we have done, even in Indian country where we live, I live on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and we have segregated our mother so badly that the policies that come forth segregated us as a people that are supposedly living with Mother Earth, and we're not because of those policies. So there's a movement that comes from Indigenous people reclaiming that, saying we no longer want federal policies to come in and tell us how we live on our own mother, how we can harvest medicines for us that are good for us from our own mother. We want to move forward with our own Indigenous policies, our own Indigenous ways. And I try not to say culture anymore. I was scolded by an elder in Unchi. And she said, Monica, I just hate that word. And I said, why is that? And she said, you ever go to a hospital and you have this sore on your stomach and they say, well, first thing we're going to do is take a culture of it. And then we're going to tell you what to do and how to do because we have this culture. So I said, I get it. I totally get it. So what should we use? And she said, lifeways. Those are our lifeways. And I thought that was so powerful because our lifeways come from Unchi Makar, from our mother. And that's what we need to hang on to. And I think that's why it's so important for us as Indigenous people to maintain and sustain that connection to all that there is, to the root nation, to the wing, to the four-legged, to Mini-Wachoni, to the water. All of that, we need to maintain that, sustain that. So I think that as we look forward, that vision has to always maintain that Mother Earth needs to be healthy. And I think that's why it's so important to include the Indigenous in that struggle, skirmish, whatever we want to call it. But that's what I like to say, and I just will continue counting coup on all of those oil companies.
Lifeways, I love that. And I love these panels. Every time I moderate or listen to one of these panels, I'm always learning something new. I hope some of you guys out there watching this panel now are doing the same. And so moving on, trying not to take up too much time. Usually I do, not about me, sorry. Now, Monica, this event was organized by the World Wildlife Fund. You're a tribal community liaison for the WWF. Can you tell us a little bit about where and how WWF works with Indigenous folks, and then some of the local work that you're doing?
Sure. So we work across the Northern Great Plains, and we have one I am a part of too, and we have just named it. We call it BINGA now, but it used to be what we called Sustainable Financing Initiative. And this initiative started really with tribal wildlife programs. There's 15 tribal nations within the Great Plains area, our ecoregion. And we just started with doing an assessment, and we found out the disparity and the inequities of our tribal wildlife programs in terms of funding, the amount of acres that they managed, and the type of wildlife that they had to work with. And so we just started what we call the Sustainable Financing Initiative, bringing all these nations together and just talking about what are some ways we can achieve some sustainable financing. Grant funding was the only solution that was being entered in Indian country. And it meant that if you got a grant, great, you could move something forward. If you got a grant, well, you had 3 years to move this project forward, and that it was never sustainable. So we started looking at ways of doing this, and so we're still working on that in that direction, and this is for all 15 nations in the Great Northern Great Plains area. So we work with all of the nations, and that's who sits on the steering committee that we have. And we have just recently renamed it, and I love this. It's called BINGA, and what that means is Buffalo Nations Grasslands Alliance. So it's people of the Buffalo Nations that are part of this, and it's so it's a wonderful, and we're looking at forward, and we have just recently approved from a feasibility study that it's going to be feasible to move forward with creating the Conservation Trust Fund. So that's what we're moving forward with. So that's what World Wildlife is doing. And then we also work with reintroducing and restoring black-footed ferrets, and that and all of its controversy because of the federal policies that were pushed on Native people, that it even becomes tough to reintroduce a species of animal that was part of our ways in the past, you know. So, and we also look at restoring bison in different areas, and we're looking forward to establishing the biggest bison herd in the North American continent, owned by tribal members on the Rosebud Sioux tribe. So we're looking at doing that. It will be a 1,500 head bison once the project is complete. And then my work locally, I work on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and it's all around land. So we have an area that was a former bombing range, and I heard Maka's words wisely, was a former bombing range, and Department of Defense came in and pretty much just trashed the area because it was a practice for World War II. And then once that happened, the National Park Service came in and worked a deal with Congress, and the tribe fought as hard as they can, and what they did, they were able to retain ownership of that land. So the individuals lost their land. There was several families that lost their land again. So once they were, you know, the treaties came in, then they were given allotments, and then once the allotments they were living on the land, then they were once again removed from the land so that this aerial gunnery range could be created. So the tribe now owns this 133,000 acres, but the National Park Service has a management easement deed on this. So it's supposedly co-managed. So that's the work that I do. I went through our entire community and I did a survey asking our own tribal members what they would like to see or not see on this particular area. And sorry, it's a train. We just pulled off the river and we came to a little town to find Wi-Fi, and this is what we get. Anyway, so now we're looking at how do we take that survey information from the community and really create a declaration of priorities, and how can we move that through our political structure of our own tribal council and our administration, saying this is what the community wants. 133,000 acres. What we could do with that, we could start answering some of our economic challenges. To think we could feed ourselves. Right now, not a single ounce of meat comes back to feed us as a nation, although our economy is grass. So that's what we do, and I'm sorry I get a little passionate about it, but that's what we do. And so WWF is very active in working on restoration and working on some of the involving community, and I think that's really important, is what does the community really want? And I think that's a really unique step that WWF has taken. So I get the privilege of working from Pine Ridge, from home, and coming to Bozeman every now and then. So we started the other day in Bozeman, and I got to see some of my colleagues. So anyway, that's that.
Yeah, don't apologize for passion. That we need a lot of all of that, those good passion vibes these days, just to keep that hope alive. So thank you very much for all the work that you do and letting us know about that, what you're doing out in Pine Ridge. It's just, there's so much work to be done. It's amazing. That's a lot of land. I'm so, you know, hopefully that goes well, to do a documentary about that. Okay, so we did get some audience questions. So one of the questions that the audience had was, you know, we're talking a lot about how we want to know, folks want to know how young children and their families that are not Indigenous, how can they help support and extend this kind of conversation? Well, Maka, you want to take the first one since I think you're the youngest of the crew. Just by looks, I know that's not proper, but you know, you look a little younger than everyone.
I'm actually 52,
Oh,
but
no.
I use seaweed kelp masks. I'm just kidding. There's, well, first of all, research whose land you're on and learn about that history. So wherever you are, there is a high likelihood that Indigenous people have lived there or live there. Research and watch movies by Indigenous filmmakers or read Indigenous literature. There's a lot of really incredible, there's an incredible range of Indigenous writers and authors of children's books. And so being able to read and learn children's books using Indigenous artists and Indigenous authors is an incredible way to start that at a young age. Once, I suppose, events can open up again post-pandemic, in many ways, your city may have events that are hosted by Indigenous people or cultural circles and dances where you can actually, they can see and interact and ask questions in person. And learning how to do land acknowledgement in your area is a big one. Learning how you can learn about who's lived there and acknowledging the people that have lived there, I think is a good way to kind of start with children. And if there's any way where I would love for there to be a letters to Indigenous elders programs. I help run a youth program here in Alaska, and one of the things that we wanted to do was do letter writing, physical letter writing to, one, support the post office, but two, write letters to elders on the Navajo Nation, those that were needing to be really isolated because of the pandemic. But let me grab a few links. I'll pop it in the Q&A or in the chat box for more resources for children.
All right, and Casey, do you have any thoughts on how young folks can get involved? Maybe, or families that are not Indigenous, how they can help with this conversation?
I know one thing that is a difficulty for my children, grandchildren, and I remember myself, is to ask for a true history in your classroom. I'm not real crazy about formal education anyway, or that kind of caged up teachings where everybody has to sit in a row and learn the same thing and spit it all back out, you know. I'm not crazy about that to begin with. But if a person has to participate, they should be given truth. So maybe those children should tell their parents to tell their school board, we want the true history of the United States, of the colonizers. We want to have an understanding of where we are. This young lady had very good points. Land acknowledgements are very powerful. But if our babies have to be embarrassed about their own culture by being relegated to a mascot mentality, then there is something wrong to begin with. But to say honest to goodness, we don't have time for all of that either. That has to be secondary. The first thing that has to be understood is we're in a crisis. And human beings may be expelled from the Mother Earth in her purification because of the manner in which we've treated her. So go to your schools, tell them we want to do a recycling program. We want to be energy free and have solar energy, wind energy. We want to not be dependent on the fossil fuels right now. Make prayers for the gas and oil itself that belongs in the belly of our Mother Earth. You know, move forward aggressively with moving away from fossil fuels. And if you need to start it in your own home, compost, you know, grow your food, have a little garden. If it's one little plant that you can eat from, you're a champion, you're a warrior, you're on your way forward.
Awesome, awesome. Brian, what are your thoughts?
I mean, all of the things I was thinking have been said, yeah. And I guess where I'm at, you know, we've participated, you and I both, in campaigns to protect ethnic studies, right? Which is exactly what everyone is talking about, the true history. And there's an attack on that right now. You know, I put in the chat this kind of throwing some shade at 45 for announcing this, you know, ministry of propaganda. And we need allies to shut that down. Like that's like the exact opposite of what we need right now. And really all that ethnic studies does is honor everyone's life experience, life ways, right? The word that we just captured today. It's not culture, it's not art, it's life ways. Like we need a diversity of life ways. And we have to acknowledge the life ways that we have criminalized, that we have ostracized, that we have prevented, you know, through forced forced assimilation of what it means to be an American. And if you're in another country, you know, what it means to be whatever national, you know, nation you want to put up. But yeah, I think that's of the most important thing. And I think young folks are already showing us the way, right? They are living much differently and in a much different world than what we grew up in. You know, where I'm at, they've had like chemical disasters, environmental disasters, now the pandemic, you know, complete disruption of their entire youth. So I think we need to listen more to the youth also and hear what they're going through to help guide us into the future. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks. Monica, how can youth and non-Indigenous folks participate and help get this conversation further out here?
Well, I think that when we talk about tell the truth, I think that's where we start, and it's really looking at our educational systems. I was just recently looking at some history books, and I was looking at the massacre of Wounded Knee, and there was like a paragraph in a chapter in a book, and that was it. There was no history of who Indigenous people were or any land acknowledgement, if you want to call it that, you know, but there was just, so I think that we really need to bring forth that information. And I think that we need to look at curriculum, and I think we need to adopt curriculum in these schools that tell the truth, that, bring that knowledge and that wisdom forward, because we have the Indigenous knowledge is so powerful and so deep that we lost that. We lost that in the way that history is taught in school. So I think that, you know, across the board, if you're Indigenous person or you're non-Native or whatever, I think we ask that the truth be told and that it be told in curriculum and written that way. And let Indigenous people write some of that. I think that would be awesome.
I'm definitely a believer in the fact that we have to tell our own stories. That's a lot of the work that I do now. So I'm right there with you, Monica, on that for sure. Thank you. Again, thanks everyone. If you have any questions, we're going to be coming to a close in about 20 minutes. So if you have any last minute questions, make sure you get them in there. We do have another question from the audience. It is curious if any of our panelists are familiar with Indigenous ecological organizations in the Global South. And I'm gonna have to let, you know, one of you take the lead on this one because I can't, you know, I'll let you speak if any of you guys are familiar with Indigenous ecological organizations in the Global South. Brian?
Anyone? Because I'm the closest to the Global South, right? Yeah, I mean, obviously in the film, there's some incredible communities that are featured. And I think, you know, first we have to understand that the reality for people is very different based on where you live. And the way work is done and the way it's discussed, I think is also very different. So when I hear like ecological organizations, you know, I think like a typical conservation organization comes to mind. And I would say that, you know, South and in Central America, that the way the work is done is very different. And so thinking of the Sarayaku, you know, the words that we use just don't fit. They don't connect with the level of connectedness that comes with their work. You know, there's a spiritual component that is not present in, you know, the environmental work that a lot of NGOs have, right? It's more of a business culture. So I think that's one, but yeah, there's several tribes that I know we have worked with in different networks. And I know that Casey Camp has visited many communities in the Global South as well. But those are the relationships that we're building right now, right? And that's part of what is featured in this film and what we hope to continue to do. I've worked with communities in Mexico. A lot of times they're just individuals, right? They start out as just individuals. They don't have an organization. They have no funding. They have even less resources than we have here in the States. And so, you know, it's also hard to like to name organizations for that reason too, because they're just incredible, you know, oftentimes women who are doing organizing work to protect their communities, right? So we're back to that word, protectors, land defenders. Yeah, but that's something that we can continue to work on and put, you know, on our website. And we're raising funds for an organization, you know, with this film right now. So I definitely look up the COFAN and other communities as well. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, I do. Thanks before someone jumps in. I do want to thank you for that segue. The COFAN Survival Fund is one of the organizations that this event is raising funds for, and we'll put a link to that organization in the chat. Is there anyone else on the panel that is familiar with groups in the Global South? Anyone want to speak to that? And if not, that's fine. Oh, Maka?
I will pop a link into the chat because I can recommend following the work of Nina Gualinga, who I met at the Conference of Parties. She does incredible work. And I think through following your work, you can get connected to various organizations she's working with. She actually won a World Wildlife Fund award, I think, last year or the year before.
Yeah, you know, it's funny that you mentioned that. I've met her before too, and here recently I've seen a lot more. She's posting, seems to be posting a lot more from her community on Facebook. So if you can find her on Facebook, you'll get even more insight on that. Okay. All right. So one of the things that I think has been coming through in this conversation has really been the this tie to the land. I think, do you think, guys, we may have time for one more question, but if it runs a little over, because it seems we might be getting a little bit running on time, I just want to give you guys a chance. Let's go ahead and share some closing thoughts. Monica, since you're part of the Wildlife Federation, would you like to go last or first?
I'll go last, and it's
That's
fun.
what I was going to ask.
Wildlife fun.
Okay. All right, Monica, we'll start with you. Any, considering, you know, any kind of last thoughts that you have, maybe something that we haven't covered in this particular panel that you think needs to be said?
Our answer is by within self-determination and control over our own destiny as Indigenous people. And that's rooted in acknowledging our past and honoring our ancestors. However, moving forward in resilience, I believe, is the only way we can heal. We traumatize ourselves when we talk about what has happened. We re-traumatize ourselves when we talk about trauma. And moving forward in resilience is the only way to do so. I feel like Indigenous folks that are doing climate work, it feels like we're in a spy movie where the end of the world is coming, and we have this X amount of days to save the world from an evil bad guy in a suit. And it's insane to me that the people that are, you know, leading these companies, they're humans, and they may have children, and they're knowingly taking actions which may destroy part of the earth, while they also know that their own descendants are going to walk the same earth. And so that separation from your genealogy is something that I think it's important to recognize, and to recognize that to provide a voice for the next generation and for us as living, thriving human beings lies in the protection and the defense of the world as we know it. Indigenous people are threaded together, I think, through that thought path. And the more that I think people can understand where we're coming from, that tree that I talked about with all the roots and the heartstrings, it doesn't matter if you're not Indigenous or not. We will reach out and we will thread and tether with you and help ensure we can help save the world before the time runs out, I suppose. Maybe, hopefully not without explosions and running away in slow motion, unless you're into that.
All right, thank you for that. Brian, any last words, thoughts that you have?
Yeah, and I'm gonna answer in part the question that Shane Murphy put in the Q&A, and she's just asking ways of healing that have helped with those traumas that Monica is talking about. Yeah, so for me, you know, again, it's been really difficult just to even know what traumas I suffered from, right? Like, it takes really deep work. I just knew that personally, culturally, where's that word? The family and the communities that I grew up in, like, we're given a raw deal. It's like, something ain't right here. What happened? And I think a lot of young folks, like, when they begin to realize their place in the world, right? Their political, their social, their capital, all of that. It's harsh. It's really harsh. And you start to also see the traumas in your family around the same time. And it's hard because these are people you love, right? But they can inflict harm on you as well. And I don't think that's different from anyone, Indigenous or not. But for an Indigenous person, you know, as you grow older and you begin to learn about the atrocities that you know, our people have suffered from, and continue to, you know, I slipped earlier because I was thinking of the forced hysterectomies that are happening in ICE detention centers right now. Like, that is so, I don't want to cuss, but like, this has happened throughout history to our people. And that's just one form of violence, right? So to detangle all of that is hard. It's really hard. But to know that we're still here, that we are alive, and that our families, you know, are here because they have developed and they have maintained and practiced their spiritual ceremonies and their customs, and still celebrated life, you know, during all of this, is how I have sort of helped heal from this. And I still have a lot of hangups, right, from growing up in a US dominant culture, but I can recognize now more the things that have helped me survive all of that violence. And just reaching out to things like the Peace and Dignity Journey and participating in that is powerful. Meeting with Casey, meeting with Melina in Canada, all of the folks, and seeing how they've continued to maintain their identities, and practice, you know, their life ways has been just a really important part of my own healing. So that's just some of what, you know, things that I do, and I'm trying to find the time to, you know, learn the language that is my original native tongue, and so many other things. But thank you all for joining. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I have to say, Brian sometimes moderates this panel. So yes, you are going to say exactly what I want to thank everyone for joining with the panel so far. You know, you can still make a donation to support the movie and the movement. We're going to post a couple of links. The money the portion of the donations will go to the Native-led organizations, the Braveheart Society and the Co-Fan Survival Fund. Again, we'll be putting those links so you can click on to donate or find out more about those organizations in the chat right now. Casey, please, last minute thoughts that maybe something we haven't covered in this panel you feel like you might need to be said?
Yeah, tomorrow is the last day of the summer of 2020. And the day following is called the equinox in the Gregorian calendar way. In the way of our peoples, it is entering into a particular time of being that is a harvest time. It is a time of preparation for winter, of going inside and being one with your spirit and telling your stories to your children and grandchildren and families, drawing together. And at that time, it was a time of celebration and eating together. And this is a different year, this 2020. But the universe still moves in the same manner. It still moves in a sunwise circle and moves in that way that is still the sun and the moon will be having an equal time, the male and the female energies. Everyone can participate in that singly and collectively. There will be a series of prayers that start at the Arctic Circle and go all the way down to the of our Mother Earth. We're all connected because the great mystery made it that way. Everyone can join in at that moment. Light your sacred fire. It might be a candle. It might be your own spirit. It might be a way you connect the Father, Son, and the Moon Mother, and say thank you to our Mother Earth. The next thing I would say is warrior up. Wherever you are, take action. You know, the earth will endure. She will go on. We want to be part of this sacred cycle of life as a species, as humans do. What the young lady Maka was talking about. Maka, by the way, in our language is medicine. So I heard you, medicine girl. The beauty way that you talk and the way that you represent your generation is very powerful. You're very appreciated and necessary to this story. I don't feel like we're in the last moments here because we do represent on this red quadrant the resilience of all of our ancestors, the resilience of the unborn who are calling us to lay a path out in front of them. I have 100% belief that the 7 generations from now will have air to breathe, water to drink, food to eat, and within their cellular memories are going to be the cellular memories of my mama and all the ones that came before. It's a beautiful time to be alive because we can be that ancestor that our children say they made a difference.
Thank you. And Monica, last but not least, Monica, last thoughts on the panel, things we have not talked about.
You know, I guess just as WWF and being the entity that is really sponsoring this, I want to take the time to say thank you to Casey, Brian, and to Maka. I really appreciate, and to you as well. I really appreciate you all taking your time and sharing your words. They were powerful words. And I believe that, you know, in my closing, I would like to say I try to walk those, I relearn those. And it's such an honor to be able to share those as well. And we always talk about, you know, 7 generations. And when I work in development or anything, I always say, what does 100 years look like down the road? What do we need to do? And I know the first response that we say is we need Mother Earth to be here. So, you know, we talk about that, and I just think that those kind of concepts and that language and the knowledge that each and every one of you have and the paths and the journeys that you have taken, even your young self, Maka, I really appreciate your words. And I feel like they really come from the heart, and that it's not just because you heard them or you've learned them, you've actually experienced them. And I wanted to say, you know, when you were asked, Ryan, to say, how do you say thank you? And Panka, I was going to share a little bit of a story, and that was that Rosalie Little Thunder talked about learning the language in the past, and she shared with me, and she said, you don't memorize it. You can't memorize it because then you will forget it. You have to own it. You have to really own it, and then you will never forget it. And I said, what does that mean? And what she did, she went through an exercise, and she just gave me one Lakota word, and she said, Gi. And I went through all these things, round, and she would point at something, square, yellow, bright, and it finally came to where it was the word brown is what it translated to. That was many years ago, and I have never forgotten that because I own that. So, you know, and I think, you know, that's what we need to do when we talk about working with the young people is we need to own that. We need to experience that. And I think that was an Indigenous way of teaching, was really sharing. We have a young camp, some young campers that go out and they learn how to measure velocity. The way they learn how to measure velocity is they make their own bows and arrows, and then they shoot them and they measure their velocity and they own it. They understand it. So, you know, there's that Indigenous knowledge, and it's also using the right kind of woods. That came from our ancestral teachings. What kind of wood would you have to use to make a bow that would shoot so far and withstand the seasons and stuff, you know? So there's just all of that that's in there. And I guess, you know, I just want to say thank you to all of you. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, and let's continue on, and let's just be as passionate as we can about the work that we were doing, and let's save Unchimaka.
Again, thank you all very much for your time and sharing all of your knowledge with us tonight, this afternoon in some cases. But thank you all again for tuning in to the panel. Please continue to stay in solidarity with our Indigenous communities, that we, in your own community as well. Please also fill out the survey, which is going to pop up in your browser once you leave the webinar. Again, thank you very much for everyone joining us today, and I hope you have a very wonderful week.
Wiblaho.
No.